Q Review Print Speaking to the Blind, celebrating 40 years of audio newspaper production. Welcome to this week's edition of the Herald Scotland podcast, recorded at the Bishop Briggs Media Centre by our amazing volunteers. You can get in touch with us via Facebook, Twitter or Instagram using @CuneReview, that is @CuandReview. You can also contact us directly by emailing information@cunereview.com. That is INFORMATION or by calling 0141 772 3976. That's 0141 772 3976.
This is from the Herald Scotland of Wednesday the 19th of August from the news section. Probe launched into George Anderson's electrocution death on Arran. This article is by Jodie Harrison. A probe is to be held into a man's electrocution death on a Scottish island. George Anderson, 46, from Lanark, died on March the 26th, 2025, while working at a property in Brodick on the Isle of Arran. A fatal accident inquiry into his death is now to take place, with a preliminary hearing scheduled for October the 1st, 2026, at Kilmarnock Sheriff Court. The inquiry will examine the circumstances surrounding Mr. Anderson's death and consider whether any reasonable precautions could have been taken to prevent it. Fatal accident inquiries are held to establish the cause of a death, the circumstances in which it occurred, and whether lessons can be learned to reduce the risk of similar incidents in the future. Unlike criminal proceedings, fatal accident inquiries are inquisitorial in nature and are designed to establish facts rather than apportion blame. Debbie Carroll of the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, the COPFS, Scotland's independent deaths investigation authority, said, "The death of George Anderson occurred while in the course of his employment and as such a fatal accident inquiry is mandatory. The lodging of the first notice enables fatal accident inquiry proceedings to commence under the direction of the sheriff. Mr. Anderson's family will continue to be kept informed of significant developments." That article was by Jodie Harrison and read by Karen. This is from the Herald Scotland of Wednesday the 19th of August from the news section. Scottish Rewilding Estate hosts pioneering research programme. This article is by Craig Williams. Rural school pupils visiting a Scottish conservation charity's rewilding estate near Loch Ness have been helping shape a pioneering nature-based research programme to boost young people's mental health and well-being. Working alongside researchers from the University of South Wales, the USW, pupils from Highland schools have been exploring how spending time in nature can improve well-being, help young people cope with difficult times, and support the mental health of those living in remote and rural communities. Healthy Young Minds is a nature-based early intervention program involving researchers at USW, University of the Highlands and Islands, and Dundee University. It involves high school students aged 11 to 14 years, co-producing activities to support the well-being of young people. As part of the initiative this spring, 2 groups of children from Farr and Kinloch-Even high schools visited Trees for Life's Dundregan Rewilding Centre in Glen Moriston. The young people took part in a guided rewilding walk and pond dipping activity and learned about tree identification, bannock bread making and traditional firelighting. During workshops facilitated by Ewan's Room, a Highland mental health charity, they generated ideas for outdoor activities to boost mental well-being, including camping, outdoor cafes, fire building, family activities, hill walking, wild swimming, beach combing, sports, board games, and natural crafts. Each idea received feedback from other young people and experts on green health and young people's mental health. The young people finalized their ideas and then voted for their favorite activities. The project's intention is to promote well-being through engagement with nature and local green spaces. Franny Schlicke, Tree for Life Visitor Experience and Operations Supervisor at Dundregan, said, "Supporting young people's mental health is so important, and it was wonderful to see the students enjoying the nature-rich landscape here and engaging in the activities and discussions. This research project highlights why everyone should have the opportunity to get out into nature, to enjoy its health and well-being benefits, and see for themselves why it needs protecting and restoring." As part of the research process, the young people learned about 5 ways to well-being: connecting with other people, learning new skills, giving to others, being physically active, and taking notice of the little things. Dr. Sarah Bradley, Senior Research Fellow at USW, said, "Our project is enabling young people to come up with their own ideas on how nature can support their health and well-being. It was inspiring for the team and students to be able to visit Dundregan's excellent rewilding centre and its stunning wild landscape as part of this." Co-creating with young people is a very important and effective way to engage them in tackling challenges. The project has created opportunities for addressing mental health difficulties in a preventative way through being outdoors and accessing nature. Since taking part, students reported that they now see nature as important for their mental health. They go outside more and they think about other people more. The Healthy Young Minds team is now preparing 2 papers for publication in academic journals and working to secure additional funding. The team will keep in touch with the schools to explore developing and implementing the nature-based activities designed by the pupils. Dundregan is home to over 4,000 plants and animal species, many of which are rare and protected. Dundregan Rewilding Centre offers year-round events and activities, accessible forest trails, a cafe and event space, a storytelling bothy, outdoor natural play area, and purpose-built accommodation with 20 bedrooms and up to 40 beds. That article was by Craig Williams and read by Karen. This is from the Herald Scotland of Wednesday the 19th of August, from the opinion section. Glasgow, Edinburgh and Aberdeen cities boost amid woe and BP exit. This article is by Ian McConnell. Positive news for 3 of Scotland's cities in recent days is all the more heartening given the undoubtedly challenging UK economic backdrop. Of course, there have been plenty of bright spots across Scotland's economy during what has been a particularly difficult time since the global financial crisis took a lurch for the worse nearly 18 years ago now, in the autumn of 2008. As well as the hammer blow from the financial crisis, we have also had the Conservatives' disastrous austerity policies, the coronavirus pandemic, and an extremely foolish hard Brexit. So, this has been a period where it has seemed more important than ever to properly recognise the positives where they exist, and especially so given the doomsaying that some people in Scotland seem to prefer, often, it seems, linked to personal political ideologies. Glasgow had a particularly slow recovery from the plunge in footfall arising from the coronavirus pandemic. In recent times, the city has once again been bustling, and this has not needed the hardline approach to returning to the office advocated by some people who have become bizarrely entrenched on this issue. The office market in Glasgow, amid the continuation of hybrid working at many employers, looks to be in fine fettle, a happy situation evident in figures published on Monday by real estate services company CBRE. Edinburgh did not face anything like the same challenges post-pandemic as Glasgow, particularly because of the Scottish capital's huge popularity as a destination for international visitors, some with relatively large budgets. That said, it is great to see both of Scotland's two biggest cities outperforming what CBRE describes as the UK's regional office markets. CBRE's research revealed that Glasgow's office market has this year recorded its strongest first half since 2018. Take-up in Glasgow's office market totalled 309,600 square feet in the first half, up by 18% on the same period of 2025, the CBRE said. It added that momentum built through the second quarter. Take-up in the 3 months to June was at 169,100 square feet, up by 58% on the same period of 2025. CBRE said this uplift was underpinned by the Home Office's letting of 80,600 square feet of refurbished space at 200 Broomielaw, one of the largest lettings recorded across the UK's regional office markets in quarter two. The public sector accounted for the largest share of Glasgow office take-up over the past 12 months at 28%, followed by business services at 17%, according to CBRE's latest figures. Sarah Hagan, Director and Head of Office Agency in Glasgow at CBRE, said, "Glasgow office market is showing real momentum. The Home Office acquisition of 200 Broomielaw was a significant contributor, but activity has been broad-based, with demand also coming from the business services and professional sectors." Amid all the positive numbers and comment, CBRE did highlight a challenge for Glasgow's office market. It observed supply had fallen in the opening 6 months of this year and described it as tight, highlighting an increasingly limited pool of options. CBRE observed availability fell 3% over the quarter to 2 million square feet, 19% below the 5-year average, with Grade A space making up just 18% of what's available. And it declared that no new office space had been completed in Glasgow so far this year, and only one scheme, a development at 45 Waterloo Street, is currently under construction. Ms. Hagan did note that 45 Waterloo Street is due to deliver 100,000 square feet of best-in-class accommodation in early 2027. And CBRE was upbeat about the outlook for the office market in both Glasgow and Edinburgh in terms of the demand pipeline. It declared that Edinburgh's office market also held firm, with take-up of 237,000 square feet in the opening 6 months of this year, up 2% on the first half of 2025. CBRE highlighted a 21,900 square foot letting at Saltire Court on Castle Terrace, a deal on which it advised. And the real estate services firm declared the two cities' resilience stands in contrast to a different picture across the UK's wider regional office markets. National take-up fell 15% quarter on quarter, bringing H1 volumes to 2.2 million square feet, 7% below the same period in 25, with limited pre-letting reflecting ongoing supply-side constraints across the UK. Angela Lowe, Senior Director and Head of Office Leasing for Scotland at CBRE, said of the outlook, Glasgow and Edinburgh have both outperformed the wider UK regional market so far this year, and the pipeline of activity coming through is an encouraging sign for the months ahead. A strong pipeline of occupier interest is currently under discussion that should convert into further take-up before year-end, while more refurbished office space is starting to come through in both cities, helping to ease the supply constraints that have held the market back and giving occupiers the quality of stock they're increasingly looking for. There was also good news for Aberdeen in a survey published last week by commercial property consultancy Knight Frank. This was great to see, especially given the uncertainty created in the Granite City by oil giants BP's decision to sell its North Sea business. Aberdeen recorded its strongest quarter for office take-up since the period immediately preceding the COVID-19 pandemic in the 3 months to June this year, boosted by the relocation of CB&I Asset Solutions to Kings Wells and a flurry of other deals completing, Knight Frank observed. The independent commercial property consultants' analysis found that there were 221,213 square feet of office deals in Aberdeen during the second quarter, more than 3 times the 68,482 square feet recorded in the first 3 months of this year, and greater than double the 102,412 square feet figure for the second quarter of 2025. Knight Frank highlighted the fact that the take-up of office space in Aberdeen between April and June was the highest quarterly take-up since the final 3 months of 2019, before pandemic-related lockdowns and the subsequent shift to working from home reshaped office demand. In total, there were 14 such deals between April and June in the office market in the Granite City, 8 of which involved energy businesses, and the remainder across technology, professional services, and charity occupiers. The energy industry accounted for 83% of the take-up in the second quarter, Knight Frank noted, with 3 large companies in this sector relocating their headquarters. Of course, we should not forget the continuing, generally difficult economic backdrop, and in the case of Aberdeen, remember that BP's decision could have very major implications for the Granite City. That said, it is particularly important to celebrate good news when it comes our way in these straitened times. That article was by Ian McConnell and read by Karen.
These letters are from the Herald on Thursday, the 20th of August 2026. They are found in the opinion section, and the headline for our first letter, Indy Route Through EU Membership. An independence referendum will not be allowed. However, what Westminster cannot deny the Scottish Government is an advisory referendum on joining the EU. When that results in an overwhelming majority for joining, pressure should be brought on Westminster to help us make it happen. If they deny us again, only then do we force an independence referendum, the voluntary union being shown to be a mirage. Sandy Reid, Prestwick. Nuclear power, no need to fear drought. Nye Holmes, letters August 18, tells us that 2 nuclear reactors in Romania have been closed due to low river levels and asks, given the drought in England, which of its rivers would do the job. Romania is almost completely landlocked, with only a relatively small area of coastline. By contrast, the UK, except for Northern Ireland, is completely surrounded by the sea. And given the undulating nature of our coastline, the coastal areas are proportionally much greater than in most countries. Almost all nuclear reactors in the UK are on the coast and have no requirement to use water from rivers, so will not be affected by future droughts. David Clark, Tarbolton. Shetland may copy Faroes. I refer to your report, North Sea Pressure Mounts on Burnham, the Herald, August 17, and in particular to the Rosebank oil field. Shetland needs Rosebank to be approved for many reasons. If not, it will lead to the premature shutdown of both the oil and gas plants at Sullom Voe, meaning less gas to heat homes in Scotland and the UK. The consequences of that will lead to unemployment, lack of opportunity, and eventually depopulation and emigration. Shetlanders are well aware of the success of the inhabitants of its near neighbour, Faroe Isles, which severed from Denmark after the Second World War. Shetland may have to consider a similar separation. Cecil Robertson, Shetlander, Inverness. Farage will defeat Blob. After the judgment of Clacton, a clear political leader has emerged. We need leaders who know what they are talking about and indeed who they are talking to. This effectively eliminates Andy Burnham, who is good at talking but doesn't always seem to know who he is talking to. Given that he is, by whatever establishment process, currently PM, this is potentially problematic for our country. We heard plenty of hype about a newly discovered chemistry, but when a reaction with the democratic process in Clacton was required, all the Conservatives' leaders' chemicals were well hidden behind comicals. For the Tories, their strategy involved the chemistry of grasping at a solution while avoiding putting their deposit at risk. However, the clearly observed outcome of this political experiment in Clacton is an effervescent and vindicated Nigel Farage, who now awaits the further reaction of a vindictive establishment, an establishment which exists only to perpetuate the establishment. If we are to understand the mechanics of what we are witnessing, we must move the metaphor to physics. This is political physics, presenting us with the spectacle of the hitherto immovable blob in its last throes, as it now encounters the irresistible force of Nigel Farage and Reform UK. Dr. Stephen William Welsh, Stornoway, Western Isles. That concludes the selection of today's letters from the Herald. The final letter today is from the Herald on Thursday, the 20th of August 2026. It too is in the opinion section, and the headline is Reducing Prison Overcrowding. Here are some of the options. Linda Fitzgerald, letters August 14, recommends having white-collar criminals sentenced to community service instead of imprisonment, and deporting foreign nationals at the outset of their prison sentence. She claims this would result in prisons no longer being overcrowded. Leaving everything else aside, the figures don't support her argument. Currently, Scotland's prisons have 700 more prisoners than their design capacity. There are 749 foreign national prisoners. Of those, 340 are being held on remand and so could not be considered for deportation. That leaves 409 to be deported if we implement Miss Fitzgerald's recommendation in full. That would still leave prisons overcrowded by 291 prisoners. Removing all white-collar criminals would still leave prisons overcrowded. The Scottish Prison Population Statistics 24-25, issued by the Scottish Government, categorise prisoners' crimes into 9 groups. Group 3 includes all crimes of dishonesty. This ranges from housebreaking to shoplifting to fraud. In that last subgroup, there are 39 prisoners. Removing those from prison would still leave prisons overcrowded by 252 prisoners. I agree with Ms Fitzgerald that community-based alternatives should be used wherever possible instead of prison, but my argument goes further than prison overcrowding. The existing prison system fails to rehabilitate prisoners. The Scottish Government publication Reconviction Rates in Scotland 2022 to 2023 offender cohort states that 26.1% of prisoners released commit a further offence within a year of being released. The Parole Board for Scotland annual reports consistently show that life-sentenced prisoners have only a 1 in 5 chance of gaining parole on their first appearance before the Parole Board. For community-based alternatives to work, they must be considered as credible alternatives to imprisonment. That means asking sheriffs and judges why they sentence criminals to prison rather than use community-based alternatives. It also means ensuring there is sufficient funding to meet the increased demands on community-based services. It could also mean educating the public in general, and victims specifically, on community-based sentences and when they are and are not appropriate to use. However, rather than require that community service is automatically applied to certain categories of crime, I would leave sentencing discretion with the court. The court is presented with all information as to the criminal's suitability or not for community-based sentence. This means I wouldn't restrict community-based sentences to particular crime types, such as white-collar crimes, but to anyone whom the court deems to be suitable, unless the court is prohibited from using community-based sentence, such as murder, where imprisonment must be the sentence. I don't agree with Miss Fitzgerald's blanket proposal to deport all foreign nationals. She takes no consideration of the foreign nationals' personal circumstances. What if they have a family here? What if they were fleeing persecution in their home country? Deportation should only be used as a last resort, where there's a clear public benefit to having that person removed from the country. David Logan, Mulgai. This article is from the Herald on Thursday, the 20th of August 2026. It is found in the opinion section, and the headline is "The Books That Explain Why Politics, Society and Democracy Feel Broken." And the article is by Neil Mackay. The tragedy of my generation is that we were raised in a period when news and analysis moved slowly enough for even those who didn't stay across current affairs to have a fairly good understanding of important events. I recall as a teenager watching reports of the Westland affair, Google it kids, lead the news for an entire year. Between 1985 and 1986, every spit and cough of this scandal within Margaret Thatcher's government was subjected to minute examination in print and on television. Aged 15, I knew enough about the story to form a fairly lucid opinion on an issue which was essentially about the rescue of an ailing helicopter factory. Today, the Westland affair would last less than an afternoon. Today, the US President can claim nearly 40 times that his lunatic war with Iran is over, while war rages and there's barely any comment. Today, what should be the smartest, most informative programme on the BBC, Newsnight, is reduced to a clickbait talking shop for wannabe influencers. Events now happen at breakneck pace, yet it takes time to digest and understand complex affairs. That clash, that tension between speed and understanding, is at the heart of the many crises facing not just Western nations, but the entire world. Speed has broken the media. In the past, the press and broadcasters helped the public make sense of the news. Now, the media, in all its guises, whether mainstream and legacy or social and new, cannot keep up. And so, people are left struggling to comprehend the world. When comprehension stalls, nonsense, fear, speculation, or mere babble fills the vacuum. When people lack facts and understanding, mountebanks thrive. The book, though, the beautiful old-fashioned book, remains a source of slowness. An author can spend a year or more mulling complex stories and events, put them in context, and give them meaning. Currently, there are 3 must-read books which explain the entirety of our modern woes. The first is Hyperpolitics, Extreme Politicisation Without Political Consequences. It's by Anton Jager, who teaches the history of political thought at Oxford University. Essentially, the book breaks recent history into chunks. The period 1914 to 89 was a time of mass politics when most people felt actively engaged in politics and believed politics could change things. From 1989 to 2008, when the financial crash happened, it was the age of post-politics. People felt disengaged. Politics was run by technocrats, but life was okay. From the crash to 2020 came the age of anti-politics, when anti-establishment parties and movements sprang up around the world. People were angry and wanted to change politics, so it once again felt like it had purpose in their lives. Clearly, that failed. So, from 2020 onward, we entered the age of hyperpolitics. This is defined as the politicisation of everything but the achievement of nothing. We fight about every conceivable issue, but nothing seems to change. Governments appear utterly incapable of meaningful action. I would say that in lockstep with hyperpolitics came hypermedia. Rather than taking time to really understand events, the press and broadcasters felt compelled to mimic the madness of the online world. The media became a churn. As a result, hyperpolitics gets more hyper, and hypermedia gets more hyper, and we all feel like we're on a fairground ride and our heads are spinning. Another book frames why hyperpolitics arose and what it's doing to the world. I Eat the Stars by Sarah Wilson posits that we're heading for the same sort of fate as the Romans or Mayans, social collapse. Wilson has a history of disturbing prescience. She wrote about issues like the dangers of sugar, anxiety, and the climate before these were considered mainstream. Our civilization, she says, is buckling under the weight of its own complexity. Everything seems broken because everything is breaking. It resonates on a personal level. We all feel that our cities are crumbling, the NHS is unrecognisable, education, transport and policing are falling apart, there's war everywhere, the rules of the global order have disintegrated, the planet is burning, and nobody seems to be doing anything about it. We're in a period like the Bronze Age collapse, when ancient civilizations started disintegrating thanks to new military technology, economic interdependency, and droughts and famines. This is a cusp moment for humanity. Wilson offers a little hope by saying that after the Bronze Age collapse, there came what's known as the Axial Age. That's the period around 500 BC when there was a great intellectual and spiritual flowering across the planet. New religions like Buddhism arose, great philosophers like Socrates appeared on the world stage. It was the time when currency was invented and art and literature flourished. The final book, which I think everyone should read, raises a darker possible outcome. It's called The Nerd Reich, Silicon Valley Fascism and the War on Democracy by Gil Duran. Put simply, the book warns that the billionaires and trillionaires of big tech are out to get democracy. Democracy stands in their way, and they'll happily rip it to shreds. Many of big tech's biggest names embrace a form of right-wing extremism that I find frankly terrifying. Amid hyperpolitics, hypermedia, and the threat of social collapse, there has never been a better time to be a billionaire with an agenda. Infamously, Peter Thiel, the tech tycoon's tech tycoon, once said that he no longer believed that freedom and democracy were compatible. Elon Musk previously described empathy as the fundamental weakness of Western civilization. Curtis Yarvin favours a national CEO, or what's called a dictator, as head of state. We should be thankful to these three writers. They explain what has happened and they give a guide to what may come, for good or ill. Of course, the great and terrible irony is that fewer people are reading books today, and in the time it took these writers to get their works published, this hyper world has spun even further out of control. But at least there are folks still out there trying slowly to make sense of the world. As long as that's the case, the flame of sanity remains burning. even if it may seem at times that it's about to splutter and extinguish. That report was by Neil Mackay.
From the Herald Scotland, Sunday the 23rd of August 2026, from the news section. Glasgow gang member caught after filming himself hiding dirty cash. Report by Connor Gordon. A crucial member of a major dial drug gang helped get himself caught after a video of him hiding a large haul of dirty money was found by police. Mohamed Hanif was an administrator for the food delivery style narcotics operation headed by supercar driving dealer Saad Qayyum. Hanif worked closely with Qayyum's trusty lieutenant Ayadeep Singh in the lucrative trafficking business. The 32-year-old has now joined the pair behind bars after he admitted to his involvement in the gang at the High Court in Glasgow this week. A judge heard how Qayyum, 37, posed as a bona fide businessman. He was the director of the Key Lounge Shisha Bar in the city's Paisley Road, where legitimate and criminal enterprise overlapped. The kingpin also had a food company called SQZ Trading Limited. Both firms were used to launder ill-gotten gains. Prosecutor Chris McKenna explained, Qayyum utilised a drugs distribution model comparable to a large-scale business similar to many of the online food delivery services available. He had a huge customer base, consisting of thousands, who were supplied with controlled drugs by an extensive network of drivers assisted by administrators and safe house holders. The group regularly sourced cocaine and ecstasy from an underworld figure Ryan Carville, 32, who split his time between Glasgow and a £30,000 a year home in Dubai. But the net closed in when Qayyum's right-hand man Singh, 32, was stopped by police with his Ford Ranger pickup reeking of cannabis. They then seized £4,000 in cash, digital scales, small bags of ketamine, white rocks of cocaine, another substance used to bulk out drugs for profit, as well as 3 phones. One of the mobiles revealed a WhatsApp account called Sam's Party Shop. Mr. McKenna. A download of the data provided extensive evidence that a large drug dealing network was currently in operation involving organised crime. It prompted the Operation Arachnoid investigation. Over 5 million messages were recovered and analysed. The Billy's Multivitamins account operated by Qayyum's mob was also found, as well as another named ZZZ. Police found contact with almost 4,000 customers looking for cocaine, ecstasy and ketamine. Hanif's involvement in the gang emerged during the probe. His role involved acting on the instructions of Singh. Explaining what he did, Mr. McKenna this week said, the administrators played a crucial role in the overall success of the Arcanoids Group's drugs business. They were responsible for the entire transaction process of customers purchasing drugs, maintaining stock levels, recording the amount sold and how much money earned. Hanif was also responsible for directing the drivers to acquire the proceeds of the sale of drugs. They were further involved in directing a network of drivers to collect and transport narcotics. A menu/price list was regularly sent out by an administrator to all of their customer contacts. Hanif found to have been in regular touch with Singh, including chatting about their boss, Qayyum, known as Sandy. Referring to one video, Mr. McKenna told the court, on February 24th, 2020, Hanif shared a video of himself hiding a large quantity of cash within an air vent in the kitchen of Key Lounge. Hanif and Singh also discussed the making of drugs and being cautious about police. First offender Hanif, of Clydebank, West Dunbartonshire, pled guilty in court to a serious organised crime charge spanning between 2019 and 2022. He had been on bail, but was remanded in custody by Judge Lord Mulholland as sentencing was adjourned until next month. Qayyum was sentenced to 8 years and 10 months in February 2026, after he also admitted to his involvement. The illegal trade was so awash with dirty cash, he drove a fleet of expensive cars, including a £314,000 McLaren 765T. Carville, who also pled guilty, was locked up for 8 years and 3 months. Singh was meantime sentenced to 7.5 years, and a fourth man, 35-year-old Adil Iqbal, to 6.5 years at a previous hearing. That article was written by Connor Gordon and read by Ian McKenna. From the Herald Scotland, Sunday the 23rd of August 2026, from the news section. Royals attend church service near Balmoral Estate, by Nick Forbes. The King and Queen, along with the Prince and Princess of Wales and their children, have attended a Sunday service at a church near the Balmoral Estate. Troops from Balaclava Company, 5th Battalion Royal Regiment of Scotland, provided a guard of honour as the family members arrived at the tiny granite Crathie Kirk in Aberdeenshire. The soldiers lined up on both sides of the leafy driveway leading up to the church, and the fleet of cars passed between them as they took to the royal occupants up to the door. Charles and Camilla were travelling in the first car, while William was driving the second car, which also carried Kate and the couple's 3 children. The Princess Royal and her husband Sir Tim Lawrence were in another one of the cars, and the Duke of Edinburgh and his daughter Lady Louise were in another vehicle. A crowd of onlookers had gathered outside the front of the church to witness their arrival. The visit comes days after news of the Duke of Sussex's imminent return to the UK emerged. The royal family arrived for their traditional summer holiday on the Balmoral Estate earlier in the week. The small Church of Scotland parish kirk is their regular place of worship when they are at Balmoral, and Queen Elizabeth II regularly attended services there. That article was written by Nick Forbes and read by Ian McKenna. From the Herald Scotland, Sunday the 23rd of August 2026, Politics. Scottish Government reject Jenny Gilruth bullying allegation, by political editor Andrew Learmonth. The Scottish Government has flatly rejected reports that Deputy First Minister Jenny Gilruth sent a scathing email naming officials in her department she was unhappy with. The denial came after acting Scottish Labour leader Jackie Baillie called on John Swinney to launch a full investigation into the allegations. They were first reported in the Scottish Sun on Sunday, who said the correspondence was then accidentally circulated to the wider team. The paper said that the missive not only named individual civil servants, but gave reasons for Ms Gilruth's dissatisfaction. An insider told the paper, Jenny sent an email to her private office detailing staff members she wasn't happy with and why. She basically named and shamed everybody, saying they are not worthy of working for her. But, in error, the email has gone to the whole department, with the reason she doesn't like them. They all received it. It's just quite cruel stuff. They added, this is like a kick in the teeth for them. They are devastated. This is a team that looked after Kate Forbes for years without a problem. Jenny wanted to bring in her own team, but she was told she can't move the staff like that, and she went into a huff. However, officials insisted that there was no email. Ms Gilruth inherited a team based at St Andrew's House when she was appointed Mr Swinney's deputy following May's Holyrood election, having previously served as Education Secretary. The team had previously worked under Kate Forbes. Ms Baillie said, these are astonishing accusations and they must not be swept under the carpet by the SNP. It is unacceptable to target workers or to try and drive people out of their role for no good reason. Too often the SNP acts like the rules don't apply to them, and that cannot be allowed to happen on this occasion. John Swinney must launch a full investigation into these claims and make it clear that there is zero tolerance for bullying in his government. Scottish Conservative Deputy Leader Rachel Hamilton has also called for clarity, saying the SNP must be upfront about whether an investigation is underway. The Ministerial Code states that bullying or other inappropriate conduct, wherever it takes place, is inconsistent with the code and will not be tolerated. A Scottish Government spokesperson said, Staffing decisions rest with civil service managers, not ministers. That article was written by Andrew Learmonth and read by Ian McKenna. From the Herald Scotland, Sunday the 23rd of August 2026, from the Politics section. The next Scottish Labour leader faces all the old problems, by political editor Andrew Learmonth. Anna Sawar may be away from Holyrood and Scottish Labour's top job, but the legacy of the soon-to-be peer looms over the race to replace him. While the contest is a debate about the future of the party, before Michael Mara and Joe Fagan get onto that, they need to discuss the past and May's disastrous election. The next Labour leader's difficulty, however, is that they face all of the problems Mr Sarwar faced and fixes are not obvious. In public, both men have praise for Mr Sarwar, and yet both are desperate not to be labelled the continuity candidate. For Mr Mara, that is difficult given his central role in shaping the Sarwar project's strategy and policy these last 5 years, and how close the two men were until very recently. For Mr Fagan, his bid for distance is tempered by the fact that he is surrounded by so many of Mr Sarwar's closest allies. Oliver Milne, who served as Labour's head of communications under Mr Sarwar, and Fraser Jackson, the former leader's senior parliamentary assistant, are key players in his campaign team. Asked on the BBC's Scottcast podcast what went wrong for Labour in May, Mr Mara said the party became far too narrow in our leadership and the circle of influence around the leader. Anas is a hugely talented individual, a very intelligent man, a great communicator and a really good strategist, but we ended up looking to break through into the public consciousness, focusing on just a person, but frankly we also lost definition as to who we were as a party. Asked point blank in the STB debate whether responsibility for May's defeat lay with Sir Keir Starmer or with Mr Sarwar, Mr Fagan said there was a shared responsibility. Never before in recorded polling history has a new government seen its popularity collapse in such a short space of time, but that doesn't get us off the hook in Scotland. We still have to ask those searching questions about the kind of campaign we fought. I've said before, I thought we fought the wrong kind of campaign. I think it should have been more about a combative campaign, and I think the manifesto offer should have been a more of a provocation to the Scottish people. One of the authors of the manifesto is, of course, Mr Mara. The leader gets in the end the manifesto that they want, Mr Mara rebutted. There's a process that we go through in the party, and then the leader puts their stamp on it. The problem for both men is that Scottish Labour's only route back to relevance comes through winning over the same voters Mr Sarwar was chasing. Both will, in effect, need to better a version of the strategy he pursued. However, both are likely to struggle with the same problems that dogged Mr Sarwar and, indeed, many of his predecessors. I doubt many ordinary Scots are paying attention to the Scottish Labour leadership race, Dr Fraser McMillan of the Scottish Election Study tells the Herald on Sunday. So the optics as such don't really matter. The new Labour Prime Minister is far more important to Scottish Labour's electoral prospects at this point in time. Labour's only recent electoral success in Scotland came in 2024, when they were perceived as the acceptable alternative to two unpopular incumbent governments, he added. Of course, they're the unpopular incumbent government down south now, give or take any modest Burnham bounce, and that's why they lost again in May. Scottish Labour cannot control these structural factors, but they can put themselves in a position to capitalise if and when the SNP slide further in public esteem, and having a leader who can appeal to the vaguely left of centre, indie sympathetic middle Scotland voters that they need to prize from the SNP is a necessary but not sufficient condition for that. Aside from the structural, it is the constitutional. There are those in Labour who, despondently, feel that it does not really matter what the party does, because there is this big, solid block of independent supporting voters who are going to vote for the SNP regardless of how badly they feel about the Scottish Government or the state of the country and public services. That despondency is partly warranted, partly not, says Dr McMillan. Of course, indie diehards are highly unlikely to vote for one of the pro-union parties, but only half of the people who identify as being on the yes side do so very strongly. It's similar on the no side. Weaker pro-Indy voters are more likely to give Labour a chance, as indeed some of them did in 2024. The SNP lost approximately 10% vote share between 2021 and 2026. They're clearly not invincible. And the slide in approval of the Scottish Government over that period came from inside the yes camp. I mentioned structural factors, and that's what Scottish Labour are at the mercy of. Not just the popularity of the Scottish Government and the UK-wide Labour Party in isolation, but how these things interact. The SNP did not win earlier this year thanks to a huge wave of enthusiasm, but because keeping them in government seemed like the least worst option to those moderate pro-Indy voters who strongly prefer Labour to Conservative governments at Westminster, yet felt let down by Starmer. I don't think, especially at this early stage in the parliamentary session, that the person in charge of Scottish Labour can move the needle one way or the other. But they can build a public profile, hope that Burnham succeeds while the SNP lose further ground, and put themselves in the position to be the obvious alternative First Minister to Gilruth/Flynn/Macallan/whoever by 2031. Dr Macmillan said the only path in doing so would resemble 2024's general election, which involved consolidating support amongst anti-independence voters and peeling away some pro-independence voters, making it a tough line to walk. But having a mainstream leader who can hitch his wagon to a more popular UK Labour government, as the constitutional issue continues to fade in relevance, is probably the most likely way to do it, he added. Will whoever wins even get along to make their case? Andy Burnham has ruled out an early general election, but with Labour ahead of reform and the new Prime Minister keen to free himself of tax constraints of 2024's manifesto, speculation about a snap vote continues to mount. If he does go early, Scottish Labour's new leader could find themselves fighting a UK campaign within months of taking the job, with barely any time to show what, if anything, they would do differently from Anna Sarwar. That article was written by Andrew Learmonth and read by Ian McKenna.
From the Herald. News section. Monday the 24th of August. New Angus Tower to improve greenhouse gas monitoring. Written by Rose Monker. A 100-metre tower could transform how scientists monitor greenhouse gases. The Scottish Observatory for Atmospheric Research, SOAR, was officially launched on today, August 24th, at Balrodry Farm in Angus, near Dundee. The first purpose-built scientific tall tower of its kind in the UK, SOAR is a joint project between the James Hutton Institute and the University of Edinburgh. SOAR is designed to measure more than 60 greenhouse gases, including carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and hydrofluorocarbons. It continuously samples air at 50 and 100 metres using highly sensitive instruments. The data collected will help refine emissions estimates and guide targeted climate action. It will support research into climate-smart farming and help quantify the carbon footprint of land-based sectors such as peatlands, forestry and livestock. SOAR is part of the UK Deriving Emissions Linked to Climate Change (DECC) network and contributes to wider international efforts to improve emissions monitoring under the Paris Agreement. It is also connected to other research and monitoring initiatives, including the Scottish Land LiDAR programme. The project is supported by the National Physical Laboratory and the University of Bristol. It received a £996,000 capital grant from the National Environment Research Council in 2021. The tower is equipped with measurement systems traceable to international standards, allowing its data to be compared with atmospheric monitoring stations worldwide. Dr. Jagadish Yaluripeti, senior scientist at the James Hutton Institute, said, "Greenhouse gas emissions estimates largely rely on bottom-up accountancy methodologies, which are associated with significant uncertainties. In contrast, tall tower atmospheric monitoring provides direct and independent emission estimates. This approach will play a crucial role in reducing bottom-up uncertainties and improving the accuracy and reliability of the estimates. Scotland has one of the most ambitious climate goals in the world, having pledged to achieve net zero emissions by 2045. So having accurate and trustworthy data is essential for tracking progress and guiding decisions to reach this target." Professor Matthew Williams, lead scientist at the University of Edinburgh, said, SOAR's location in Scotland fills a critical gap for the UK and Europe. It can sample air from the North Atlantic, from the northern UK, and from the European continent depending on wind direction. It is already revealing regional patterns of greenhouse gas emissions that help test our understanding and thereby improve our knowledge. Dr. Kieran Stanley, Senior Research Fellow at the University of Bristol and DECC Network Lead Scientist, said, SOAR helps us to reduce our uncertainties in UK and devolve government's GHG emission estimates. Written by Rose Moncur and read by Billy Gordon. From the Herald. News section. Monday the 24th of August. Scottish drink brand lands major US retail deal. Written by Rose Moncur. A major deal has landed a Scottish drinks brand a place on shelves in the United States. Spirits of Virtue, based in Clydebank and specialising in non-alcoholic spirits, has secured a listing at Buc-ee's, a popular convenience store chain in Texas. 4 of its products will now be sold at 7 Buc-ee's locations across the state, marking the company's first major entry into the US large format convenience market and its most significant distribution milestone to date. The selected Buc-ee's locations are in Waller, New Braunfels, Bastrop, Texas City, Baytown, Terrell and Fort Worth. Spirits of Virtue produces more than 30 SKUs across 9 brands, offering alcohol-free alternatives to whiskey, vodka, tequila, gin and bourbon. Based in Clydebank, the company is focused on delivering the complexity and flavour of traditional spirits without the alcohol content. Roddy Nichol, co-founder of Spirits of Virtue, said, "This is a proof point that non-alcoholic spirits travel beyond specialist retail and on-trade into mainstream, high-volume convenience. Texas is a deliberate beachhead for wider US expansion." Written by Rose Moncur and read by Billy Gordon.
From the Herald Scotland, Monday the 24th of August 2026, from the opinion section. Scottish police have warned about face masks. We should be worried. Article written by Mark Smith. Well, would you look at that? There we were in 2020 worrying about people who didn't wear face masks. Now here we are in 2026 worrying about people who do wear face masks. As usual, there have been calls to do something, make a law, ban people like them, but not people like us. The police have also weighed into the debate, which isn't always a good sign. But given the tense and anxious times we live in, a potential ban on masks may be one more thing to add to all the other things that we should be worrying about. There's a reason Scottish police officers are raising the subject now. Live facial recognition technology, or LTR, which compares live camera footage against a database of faces. It can be used to control entry to secure buildings, but some police forces in England and Wales are already using it to scan public spaces for suspects or missing persons or individuals with an arrest warrant, and Police Scotland is currently looking into whether they should be doing the same. The obvious flaw with the cutting-edge AI-powered tech is that non-AI actual human beings can just whack on a mask and the system's screwed. And part of me loves that, because it demonstrates that AI is terribly clever and terribly stupid, and humans can still defeat it. But the Scottish Police Federation has pointed out there's little point in investing millions of pounds in sophisticated technology capable of recognising a face if an individual can simply hide their face behind a mask. The Federation's suggested solution raises some questions, though. Its General Secretary, David Kennedy, says that in order to get round the problem of people hiding their faces from LTR, there might need to be limited circumstances in which the police could require people to remove face coverings. Something similar has already been introduced in England, with the new Crime and Policing Act, which allows the cops to establish 24-hour mask-free zones in designated areas. A senior officer can designate a public space as a mask-free zone if they reasonably believe a protest is likely to take place and is likely to or has involved the commission of offences, and it is expedient to designate the area as mask-free in order to prevent or limit the commission of offences. We'll have to wait and see how this particular provision of the law pans out in England, but assuming something similar could be introduced in Scotland, there are a couple of things to worry about.
Firstly, we've got a legal power with sweeping consequences that's based on flabby wording that's hard to define and therefore easy to abuse. Is likely to, and if it is expedient. Secondly, I've been to lots of protests, often on highly contentious subjects such as trans rights and immigration, at which some people are wearing masks, and it's often because they're worried what might happen if their employer, or even their friends and family, found out about their views, and it may be a legitimate worry. I refer you to my previous remarks about our tense and anxious times. The way the Scottish Police Federation has framed their argument also rings some alarm bells. Facial recognition technology, they say, will only work if we prevent people from covering their faces. But what that's effectively saying is that one extension of surveillance and control, cameras, will only work if we impose another extension of surveillance and control, ban on masks. And we know how this can work. Apparently small extensions can cover quite big distances if we don't keep an eye on it. Having said that, I do understand where the police are coming from to some extent. When there was a stooshy about Glasgow City Council cutting staffing hours at the CCTV operating centre, meaning the system would be unmanned for half the day, I spoke to officers about it, and they said the cameras were vital for preventing and detecting crime. They also said it was a comfort to know that if something was kicking off, the camera operators could send help quickly without having to wait for a phone call. The staffing cuts are also a reminder that the best tech ultimately relies on humans, and the same will apply to LTR. It can scan public places all it likes, but the decisions to intervene or arrest a suspect or whatever will need to be made by human staff. So why is it then, I wonder, that someone like me, someone who likes to think they're liberal on free speech and freedom of expression and is concerned about any extension of police powers, is thinking a ban on masks in public might actually be a good idea? Partly, I think, it's because the sight of masks takes me back to 2020 and the pandemic. I said back then that we shouldn't underestimate the effect the customary or mandatory wearing of masks might have on our culture. There are some countries, I said, in which masks and face coverings are common, but in Britain we tend to feel cultural angst about people covering their faces in public, and the openness needs protecting. Some people said at the time, some people still say, that the risks to health matter more. But I and many others said the response to the coronavirus wasn't just about the risk to health, it was about balancing the risk with other risks, to the economy, for example, or our way of life. 6 years on, I still believe that. I also happen to think I was right about the effects the customary or mandatory wearing of masks might have had on our culture. Even now, you occasionally see someone in public wearing a mask, and, as I say, it's not uncommon to see masks at protests. Not only does it creep me out, not being able to see someone's face is creepy, it's clear the wearing of masks in public has become a form of expression, particularly on the left and among some trans rights and LGBT protesters. As it did for some people during the pandemic, a mask can communicate to others that you have certain views. It is a physical demonstration of your opinions. Hide your face, show your opinions. And it's creepy, really creepy. The creepiness isn't confined to the left, of course. There were masked people at the recent anti-immigration protests in Glasgow, but the concerns about masks and face coverings apply to left and right. For the police, it's about the concern that if things kick off at a protest, masks make it hard to identify the culprits. There must also be a concern that the act of wearing a mask itself helps to create an atmosphere in which things are more likely to kick off. The fact people can't see each other's faces is hardly likely to create a warm and friendly atmosphere, is it? The response suggested by the Scottish Police Federation might work as a solution, who knows, but it strikes me that officers designating 24-hour no-mask zones sounds complicated and time-consuming. A better approach, perhaps, and I'm having to fight my liberal instincts to suggest this, would be a presumption against all masks and face coverings on the grounds that showing your face and seeing other people's faces is a social norm worth protecting. It will mean some awkward conversations, particularly on the subject of religious face veils. But if we worry about an extension to the powers of the police, we should worry too about an erosion of social norms and social cohesion, and the disturbing sight of faces disappearing, one by one, behind masks. That article was written by Mark Smith and read to you by Elizabeth.
From Herald, Scotland, 23rd of August 2026. From the Arts and Culture section. BBC commissions documentary about failed Glasgow airport terror attack. Article by Craig Williams. BBC Scotland has commissioned a new two-part documentary, Terror at the Terminal, which will offer a definitive account of the 2007 Glasgow airport attack. Produced by Firecrest Films for BBC Scotland, Terror at the Terminal, 2x60, will tell the story of the failed attacks that targeted London's West End and Glasgow Airport in 2007. BBC said the documentary is part of BBC Scotland's new slate of factual commissions from independent production companies, spanning a wide range of subjects, including true crime, contemporary history, terrorism, and the role of mythology in popular culture. Terror at the Terminal will combine remarkable first-hand testimony, rarely heard perspectives, archive and CCTV to take viewers inside one of the most significant counter-terrorism investigations in modern police history before placing them at the heart of the extraordinary events at Glasgow Airport. On June the 30th, 2007, a jeep laden with petrol canisters was rammed into the front entrance of Glasgow Airport and burst into flames. One of the would-be killers died, but remarkably, not one of thousands of holidaymakers and other people in the terminal on one of its busiest days of the year lost their lives. The day before the attack, 2 cars were found in central London with bombs packed with gas canisters, petrol and nails which failed to explode. David Harron, commissioning editor, documentaries and specialist factual at BBC Scotland, said, "The Glasgow airport attack of summer 2007 was a truly shocking event, and this new series will chart the inside story of the attack, the cat and mouse race between the terrorists and police, and the subsequent global intelligence operation to uncover the truth, with testimony from eyewitnesses, politicians and security experts. Terror at the Terminal promises to be a gripping and fantastic watch." Mick McAvoy, executive producer at Firecrest Films, said, "Terror at the Terminal will take viewers inside the dramatic events that saw Scotland become the target for a new and evolving form of international terrorism. Directed by award-winning filmmaker Matt Pinder, it combines extraordinary testimony from those who faced the terrorists, investigated the plots and led the security response, with remarkable archive to tell a gripping story of terror, courage and the race to stop a new threat." And that article was written by Craig Williams and read for you today by me, Bob Lizer. From Herald, Scotland, 24th of August 2026. From the Arts and Culture section. Review: The Cure Summer Sessions, Ingliston. Article by Martin Williams. 4 out of 5 stars. There is a strange problem with The Cure. They are one of the most important rock bands of the past half-century, responsible for some of the most inventive, influential and emotionally powerful music ever committed to record, and yet I've always had a slight beef with them live. It goes back to the early 1990s when they played the 3,400 capacity Cornwall Coliseum in the quiet town of St Austell. Here was a band who had created some of the darkest and most adventurous rock music of the modern era, yet somehow their sometimes low-key live experiences never quite matched what was happening inside my head. Perhaps that was the problem: expectations. Expect an explosion from The Cure and you may instead get something more elusive, an over-brooding performance in which Robert Smith and his band appear to be following their own internal rhythms. Hyde Park in 2018 proved different. That was essentially the Cure's greatest hits show, all killer, no filler, and it was magnificent. So perhaps expectations really are the key to the Cure. And at Edinburgh's summer sessions, those expectations were inevitably enormous, and they were gloriously met. Scots post-rock pioneers Mogwai made one hell of a fist of trying to upstage them first, delivering a kaleidoscopically inspired set before Robert Smith, dressed all in black, strode onto the stage, all coy and mock surprised at the adulation. Because this is not simply a band touring an album, this is The Cure, a group whose catalogue contains 3 Imaginary Boys, 17 Seconds, Faith, Pornography, The Top, The Head on the Door, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Disintegration and Wish. And the 2026 festival set makes the point beautifully. The backbone is pure 1980s Cure, with Disintegration and The Head on the Door on the cornerstones, supplemented by the occasional newer song from Songs of a Lost World, the 2024 opus that revived the Cure's critical standing after a long period in which the band had been more cultural institution than active creative force. It is telling that they don't overdo it. But it is those recognisable gems that transport the Cure into the stratosphere. The breathtaking relationship songs, Pictures of You and Love Song sound as lovelorn as you could possibly imagine. These are not merely good songs, they are extraordinary pieces of songwriting, production and atmosphere. Pictures of You still sounds like a song that should not have survived the passages of time so effortlessly. Love Song has become so ubiquitous that it is easy to forget how beautifully simple it is. But then comes the other great revelation of the set, The Head on the Door. In Between Days, Push, A Night Like This, and Encore staple Close to Me. Here is the Cure at their most accessible without ever becoming conventional. The melodies are sharper, the colours brighter, but there is still something strange lurking underneath them. In Between Days is a particular joy because it demonstrates the difference between a familiar song and a great song. Familiarity can make a song disappear into the wallpaper. Played live, it suddenly becomes a jewel again. The same is true of Just Like Heaven, another song so absorbed into popular culture that its brilliance can be taken for granted. And then there is A Forest, which back in the day was dark and mysterious, but now, with its hypnotic rhythm, feels almost danceable. If ever there was an argument for why the Cure deserve their place in the upper reaches of modern rock history, this is it. And that is where my old problem with the Cure begins to resurface. Because alongside these masterpieces come the lesser-known opuses, creating a lull in the middle of this nonetheless startling set. The Cure have always had the confidence, and occasionally the indulgence, to believe their deeper catalogue deserves equal billing. Sometimes they're right, sometimes they aren't, and this is where the comparison becomes brutal. Put Pictures of You next to a lesser-known Cure track, and the obscure song can suddenly sound exactly what it is, interesting, atmospheric, and occasionally self-indulgent. This isn't necessarily a criticism of the songs themselves, it is a criticism of the impossible standard the Cure have set. When a band can play Fascination Street, A Forest, Just Like Heaven, and Friday I'm in Love in the same evening, there is nowhere for merely good songs to hide. The Encore, introduced by Smith as light entertainment, thankfully understates this perfectly. This is the all-hits Cure. From the delectable lullaby and scrumptious Let's Go to Bed to the crowd-pleasing Friday I'm in Love, they incorporate all of what makes this band so great, inspired, off-kilter guitar pop dripping with melody at its very best. The darkness gives way to colour, movement and sheer pop brilliance. And when Boys Don't Cry arrives, there is something wonderfully absurd about watching a band that spent so much of its career cultivating an image of gothic misery finish by unleashing one of the most joyous songs of the post-punk era. It is why I suspect the Cure are at their best live when they stop trying to prove anything. They don't need to remind us that they have obscure masterpieces. They simply need to play the great songs, because when they do, as happened here in Edinburgh, something extraordinary happens. The Cure don't need to brood too much. They just need to uncover the jewels. And that article was written by Martin Williams.
This is from the Herald Scotland of Tuesday the 25th of August from the news section. NHS GGC used emergency powers to revamp managers' offices. This article is by Andrew Learmonth. Cash-strapped NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde, NHS GGC, bypassed its normal competitive procurement process on grounds of extreme urgency to spend more than £134,000 converting open-plan office space into private rooms for its most senior managers, the Herald can reveal. Documents released through Freedom of Information show it invoked emergency powers normally reserved for crises that could not have been foreseen to fast-track the refurbishment. Internal correspondence shows that the new area, dubbed the Chandelier Corridor by staff, was specifically requested by Chief Executive Professor Jan Gardner. The boss, who, according to the latest accounts, earns an annual salary of between £195,000 and £200,000, was appointed to the beleaguered Health Board last year. An email from consultants Arup, dated July 15, 2025, records that the CEO is looking to have part of an open-plan office converted into 4 single rooms. An initial quote for the works from contractor MPMH Construction came in at £38,916, comfortably above the £10,000 threshold that would normally trigger a competitive quick quote tender process under the board's own procurement rules. Rather than go to tender, NHS GGC's assistant head of estates applied for the process to be waived. The waiver, signed off by Director of Estates and Facilities Tom Steele on August 20th, 2025, and countersigned by the board's head of procurement the following day, invoked the extreme urgency exemption under the board's standing financial instructions. This is normally reserved for events that could not have been foreseen or in an emergency to maintain an essential service. The stated justification was that reconfigurations required to board HQ urgently to re-provision office space to accommodate new management structure needed to happen fast, and that going to tender would lead to unacceptable delays to the board of its most senior managerial workings. An internal timeline drawn up in July 2025 shows that this waiver was only expected to speed up the process by a fortnight. Under the competitive tender option, a contractor could not start work until September 1st. By bypassing tendering meant work could begin on August 18th. The waiver signed by Mr. Steele covered an estimated cost of £46,699, including VAT, the price of the initial partition and fit-out works alone. But the final bill came in nearly 3 times higher. Internal cost records show the project's price tag climbed through a series of follow-on orders, all placed with the same contractor and without any of them going back out to competitive tender. The initial partition and fit-out works, covering new stud partitions, suspended ceilings, doors and glazed screens, cost £46,699.20. A further £15,995 £5.76 went on air conditioning alterations, while 2 identical electrical works packages to fit new lighting and power points were valued at £17,813.54 each. A fourth order, described on the purchase order simply as to carry out works at Director's Office, J.B. Russell House, cost £28,704. On top of the contractor's costs, consultants Arup were paid $7,200 for producing the scope of works and drawings needed to procure a contractor in the first place. Together with VAT, the total comes to £134,226.36. According to Arup's scope of works document, the specification called for all work to be carried out during evenings and weekends because the building remained a live office. The finished suite brought together senior staff who had previously been spread across the building into a single corridor. According to NHS GGC's FOI response, Freedom of Information, staff affected by the move included the Communications and Engagement Director, the Governance and Corporate Services Director, and 6 personal assistants. The board confirmed that there was no formal impact assessment undertaken, although the 6 PAs affected were involved in the design and layout of their new working areas. NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde's response to the FOI request states that the board holds no record of any assessment weighing the office project against wider financial pressures, savings requirements, or patient-facing priorities, nor any record of concerns or objections raised internally about the spending, its timing, or its optics. According to papers due to go in front of the NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde Board on Thursday, they reported an annual deficit of £29.9 million for the first quarter of 26-27, and is forecasting a full-year overspend of £58 million. The report describes this position as high risk. Scottish Labour health spokesperson Jackie Bailey said, "These significant costs are bound to raise some eyebrows at a time when frontline services are under so much pressure. Of course, officers need to be fit for purpose, but there appears to have been a lack of scrutiny and due process around this spending. Public money must always be treated with the respect it deserves, and patient care must be at the heart of all decisions." A spokesperson for NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde said, "We can confirm that works were carried out to reconfigure office accommodation at J.B. Russell House. The changes were made to improve and optimise the layout and functionality of the accommodation. Such works are a routine part of managing and maintaining NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde's estate and accommodation portfolio. Changes to office accommodation take place across a number of locations to ensure buildings remain fit for purpose and continue to support the delivery of services. J.B. Russell House is one of several sites where accommodation improvements are undertaken as part of this ongoing programme." The Health Board has been under sustained scrutiny over safety and governance failures at Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, the QEUH, where deaths linked to water and ventilation problems remain the subject of a long-running public inquiry. After years of denials, NHS GGC told the inquiry in January that it was more likely than not that contaminated water caused serious infections in vulnerable patients, and acknowledged that the hospital had opened too early and was not ready. Police are currently investigating the deaths of 3 children and 4 adults. They include 10-year-old Millie Main. Last week, medical physicist Dr. Michael Bradnam told the Scottish Hospitals Inquiry he had spent 15 years raising issues with ventilation systems, electrical safety and humidity control at the QEUH, but there had been no formal responses to his complaints. That article was by Andrew Learmonth and read by Karen. This is from the Herald Scotland of Tuesday the 25th of August from the news section. Teenage motorcyclist killed in Macduff to Fraserburgh road collision. This article is by Jodie Harrison. A teenager has died following a motorcycle crash in Aberdeenshire. Police said the 17-year-old was involved in a collision on the B9031 Macduff to Fraserburgh Road, west of the junction for Pennan. The crash involved a black Honda CB500 motorcycle, which the teenager was riding, and happened at around 5:30 p.m. on Monday. The 17-year-old was pronounced dead at the scene. No other vehicles were involved and no one else was injured. The road was closed for around 6 hours to allow investigations to take place and has since reopened. Sergeant Peter Henderson of the North East Road Policing Unit said, "Our thoughts are with the family and friends of the young man who died in this incident. Inquiries are ongoing to establish the full circumstances, and we would urge anyone who believes they may have witnessed anything of note to get in touch. We would also be keen to speak to anyone who may have dashcam footage from the area. Anyone who can help is asked to call 101, quoting reference 2462 of August 24. That article was by Jodie Harrison and read by Karen.
That concludes this week's edition of the Herald Scotland podcast. Please remember to subscribe to our channels at Review and to tell your friends about our service.